Ghana was on runway 13, and the plane came to rest on a dike. It's there to...
Lebanese man, one of 3 arrested in that brutal attack on a van of Hasidic Jewish students. The very latest on the conspiracy.
Good evening. We start with that accident at LaGuardia. A big MD-80 jet skidding right up to the water's edge, just a few feet short of what could have been a deadly repeat of other accidents. Once again, it was on runway 13, and the plane came to rest on a dike. It's there to keep water from flooding the end of the runway. This time it was a backstop for the plane. Penny Crone starts our team coverage at LaGuardia. Penny.
John, it's hard to imagine leaving a night like tonight in New York where there's nothing but snow and wind and going to Denver to go skiing, but that's what about 50% of the 130 passengers on flight 795 were planning on doing. They were planning on going skiing in Denver. However, Danny will show you a shot of the plane now. The plane did not take off. It had an aborted takeoff.
And then it got bumpy, and I didn't know if we were in the water. It was just dark outside.
For the 130 passengers aboard Flight 795, it was a horrifying experience. The Continental flight was headed for Denver when suddenly the pilots aborted takeoff. Did you have reservations before you took off about the weather and about taking off?
Of course. With the weather like this all day, I was thinking, well, Dad, will I get out? Do I want to get out? You know, all that crossed your mind, you know. But I just thank God everybody's all right.
The plane skidded to a stop at the end of runway 13, its nose hanging precariously over the water. When the plane finally stopped, the emergency chute blew out and was unusable. However, a quick-thinking passenger immediately opened the emergency door.
Turned a little bit, we slid and hit the embankment there right before the water, and the plane actually did a little bunny hop over that. And I was sitting right at the emergency exit. I took it off, threw it out the window, and jumped out onto the wing and fell off the wing onto the water almost. We were right at the water, and then people just started piling out of the planes.
Do you think that was the right thing to do? Are you glad you did it?
Definitely.
I'm in shock, and I'm very angry. I'm really angry, and that's why I'm out here talking to you, because when it's snowing and when it's below freezing and when this is something to be concerned about, they should do something about the de-icing procedure.
Now, clearly, it's very important to add that 29 passengers were injured. 50% of them were injured while they were on the plane. The other 50% were injured when they were getting off of the plane. But none of the injuries, according to authorities, were serious. Mario Vasquez has a lot more into the investigation. Mario, it's up to you.
Thank you, Penny. Definitely many questions need to be answered tonight as that aircraft, Continental Flight 795, just sits perilously close to Flushing Bay tonight, just about 8 feet away. At last report, LaGuardia Airport remains closed tonight. Port Authority police say it will remain closed at least until the rest of the night. Tomorrow remains as question, as well as they try to answer those many questions surrounding that aborted takeoff. NTSB representatives who are to arrive here to investigate this crash, hopefully to answer many of those questions that remain unanswered at this hour, had trouble themselves. As you see, the snow is flying literally horizontally. Normally they arrived at similar sites via helicopter. They obviously could not do that tonight. They will arrive to try to sift through not only the snow, the heavy wind, but also the situation on that runway. Earlier, I had the opportunity of speaking with one of the police officers. As a matter of fact, the police officer who was first to enter that aircraft soon after that aborted takeoff. What he described to me, what you're about to hear, is a scene of utter panic.
They were all screaming and yelling. There seemed to, the center of the aircraft had buckled, and the roof had caved in the center of the aircraft, and there was some injured people there. But everyone was able to get up and walk off the aircraft, even though they had sustained what appeared to be head and arm injuries mostly.
As Continental Flight 795 sits just 8 feet from Flushing Bay, an aborted takeoff much too close for comfort, officials tried to get closer to answers tonight. Mayor Rudolph Giuliani issued this statement about today's incident at LaGuardia Airport.
Police Commissioner and I were originally going to go, but before we even got a chance to head out there, they had evacuated everyone and had said that it was quite successful.
And it said the pilot had explained the de-icing procedure to passengers before the abandoned takeoff. A big question as well, the condition of the runways.
Well, the runways were being constantly being groomed, and I would imagine that there was a slight amount of snow coming down, but the runways were in fairly good condition.
Airport officials say that as soon as possible they will try to get representatives from the National Transportation Board to try to at least offer up some preliminary answers to their investigation as they arrive here at LaGuardia Airport, which I might repeat to you remains closed through the night at least until tomorrow morning. So check with your air carriers before checking out and heading out here to LaGuardia Airport. This is Mario Bosques at the headquarters for Port Authority Police. John, back to you.
All right, Mario, thanks for that report. Coran?
And John, passengers on board Flight 795 were very fortunate. There were 2 other hauntingly similar accidents on this very same runway, and they were deadly. 2 years ago this month, U.S. Air Flight 405 veered off the runway during a snowstorm. It crashed into Flushing Bay. 27 people were killed. Ice on the wings was blamed for that crash. In September of 1989, another U.S. airplane, Flight 5050, also ended up in the water. 2 people died there. Of course, we will pass along any more information on this latest accident as soon as more details become available. Right now, let's go to George Smith at New York Hospital, where the co-pilot of that Continental plane was taken. George?
That's right, Corianne. Shortly after the accident, this hospital was put on high alert. However, only 2 people came.
Survivors of this bloody attack.
20-year-old Aaron Halberstam was known as Ari.
Both suffered minor injuries, and hospital officials are not releasing their names. Let's take a look at the videotape we shot earlier tonight. This is the co-pilot arriving at the hospital at about 7:30 or so. He was brought over by ambulance along with one of his co-workers who was taking care of him and offering moral support as he arrived at the hospital. He appeared to be very shaken. He did not say anything, complained of some minor injuries, as I mentioned, perhaps a back injury. He is currently being examined upstairs right now, along with a second passenger. Again, hospital officials will not release their names to us. That's the latest from here. Reporting live in Queens, I'm George Smith. Let's go back to Corianne.
Thank you, George, for the very latest. John?
All right, that accident this evening happened right in the middle of a snowstorm. In fact, the strongest storm to hit us this winter. We've got team coverage on that from the city streets to the suburbs to our weather center. But we start in New Jersey. Kyung Yoon is in Fort Lee. Kyung.
Wrong. Well, Ernie, there have been no flights in or out of LaGuardia Airport since just after 6 o'clock this evening when that Continental Airlines jet slid off the runway during takeoff and nearly went into the Flushing Bay. Now, the weather, as you can see now, was definitely a factor. It had been snowing for about 5 hours when that accident happened. Now, Continental says the plane was de-iced within 30 minutes of takeoff, but some of the passengers who were on that plane are wondering if that was enough.
Crew was concerned about ice on the wings and was attentive to that, and they explained the procedure and said, we'll de-ice and then we'll go take off. And it was a long time between the de-icing and takeoff.
The captain of Continental Flight 795 says he aborted takeoff because he didn't feel he had enough speed to get into the air. But the MD-80 didn't stop. It skidded off of runway 13 and stopped on a dike with its nose hanging 25 feet out over the frozen Flushing Bay, sending passengers into a panic.
Rocky, all of a sudden, you felt the brakes. It was a very uncomfortable feeling because you knew things were a little bit out of control then.
When they slammed on the brakes, we all went backwards and the plane tilted over. So we all grabbed each other.
Passengers opened the emergency doors and were literally sliding down the wings of the plane. Nearby work crews rushed to help.
I seen the plane coming, and I realized I wasn't going to make it, and just the feeling that you have when you see that the plane ain't going to get off like it normally does really just scares you.
These same guys were here on March 22nd, 1992, when a U.S. air jet taking off in a snowstorm from the same runway crashed into the Flushing Bay, killing 27 people. Many of the passengers on this flight believed surely that would be their fate.
I was for sure that I would be swimming in that water. Unfortunately, I have no shoes on, and that was a little bit cold, but I'm very grateful that I'm here.
Now, more than 24 of the 115 passengers who were on that plane were injured, mostly neck and back sprains. The most serious injury was a separated shoulder. 7 people, including the co-pilot, have been taken to local hospitals. The National Transportation Safety Board is on the scene here at LaGuardia and will, of course, begin its own investigation. Channel 2 News is live at LaGuardia Airport. I'm Pat Battle.
Thanks, Pat. The weather likely, as she said, a factor out there, and the weather is another big story tonight. We're getting...
It was a miracle didn't stop. Tonight, frightening moments at LaGuardia Airport as a plane skids off the runway. We will take you there live. Then
and the entire Channel 9 news team.
Good evening, everyone. We begin with a terrifying accident tonight at LaGuardia Airport. A plane skids off a snowy runway. It almost landed in the water. There are injuries. Barbara Nevins-Taylor is live at LaGuardia. What's the latest, Barbara?
Brenda, almost is the operative word. The accident occurred at low tide. Had it happened at high tide, it's very likely the plane would have been in Flushing Bay. LaGuardia Airport shut down at about 6 p.m. tonight when Continental Flight 795, bound for Denver, skidded to a stop at the very end of runway 1331. As the pilot aborted the takeoff, the plane with 115 passengers perched precariously, almost dipping into the bay.
It seemed to take a very long time before the plane tried to go up in the air. And then at some point, when we all started getting nervous about that, the pilot tried to stop and reverse the engine, and then we started skidding, and we seemed to be running out of runway, but we did seem to be slowing down. But then we hit a lot of bumps. It got dark, and then we just came to a stop with the tail up in the air.
Airline workers, airport personnel, and emergency crews rushed to the tarmac. In recent years, there have been deadly accidents here. In March 1992, a U.S. Airjet crashed, killing 27. 2 people were killed in 1990 when a U.S. Airjet skidded off the end of the runway. Tonight, people were luckier. EMS counts 29 people injured, but none of them had life-threatening injuries.
Injuries range from minor bumps and bruises to a separated shoulder being the most serious.
As officials tried to sort out the cause of the crash tonight, we found a grateful passenger looking for the pilot.
I just want to thank him for the job that he did. I mean, he pretty much, brought the plane under control and saved our lives, so that was pretty admirable.
Continental Airlines just issued a statement. The airline says that the pilot noticed that the plane seemed to be rejecting its takeoff, and so he tried to stop, but the runway was just too slippery. He did avoid flush.
It was the second time in 2 years an airliner has skidded off the runway during a blizzard at LaGuardia. In 1992, half the 51 people on board this U.S. Air flight died when wing icing brought it down in Flushing Bay. The same fate was narrowly averted last night when Continental Flight 795 came to rest just inches from the water.
The guy came back and actually checked the wings right before we took off. I don't know if that was the cause of it, but it was pretty scary.
The pilot of the Denver-bound flight said he didn't have enough speed to take off. 29 people were injured as the aircraft bounced over a berm at the end of the runway.
I'm very grateful that I'm here and that I hope I never have to go through something like that again.